Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special gathering where we have come together to honor the life and contributions of Professor Cooper. As we reminisce about our days at Madras Medical College, we are transported back to an era when education was not just about textbooks and exams, it was about passion, dedication, and the indelible impact of some of the great teachers who taught us when we started medicine. The Red Fort, where all of us began our journey into medicine, holds a special place in our hearts. It was within those historic walls that we first encountered Professor Cooper, a man whose presence was as awe-inspiring as the majestic fort itself. His passion for teaching, his unwavering commitment to excellence, and his ability to ignite curiosity in young minds left an indelible mark on all of us. Today, we have five distinguished speakers who will share their memories and insights about Redford and Professor Cooper. Our first speaker today is Mr. Sriram, a renowned historian in Chennai who has written extensively about the history of Madras and its historical buildings. Most people in Chennai and many abroad know him well. He'll share his thoughts on Red Fort, which was especially built for the anatomy department and the cadavers on which we started our medical education. It is impossible to separate Professor Cooper from the Red Fort. Most of his old students from the 60s will remember Professor Cooper driving his ambassador car into the portico of the Red Fort. Sriram will now tell us a bit more about this historic building. Over to you, Sriram.
Thank you, Dr. Badri. Friends, it gives me great pleasure to be here and to talk about the anatomy block of the Madras Medical College. I was very reluctant to speak because I said I don't have much information on it, but Dr. Badrinath was very insistent, and I'm thankful for the fact that he was insistent because he gave me 15 days to see what could be found. And at the end of it, I have more questions than I have answers. But I will share whatever I have, whatever information I have about the anatomy block of the Madras Medical College. I must also thank you all because thanks to this effort of searching, I was able to put together an article for the Hindu based on the questions that I have and hoping that somebody will come up with more information after they read it. So the college itself, as we all know, began in 1835. And the accounts vary about how the buildings were constructed, when the buildings were constructed. And by far, the most cogent account, and invariably it is the Americans who make the best chroniclers. And in 1904, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, there is a brief article about the Madras Medical College written by Dr. Nicholas Sen of Chicago. What brought him to Madras, I don't know, but he has very clearly given a chronological account of how the buildings were constructed. Of course, he does leave a few gaps, but he says that the college began, as we all know, in 1835, and the first lectures were held in rooms adjoining the quarters of the Surgeon General of the General Hospital. In yet another account, I come across a very interesting problem posed by these quarters of the Surgeon General, but we will come to that in a couple of minutes. In 1836, the college got its own building, and this comprised 4 rooms, a library, a museum, a lecture hall that doubled as an operating theatre, and a laboratory. Then there was a major expansion in 1867. This major expansion in 1867 is supported by a lot of government documentation and a lot of debate, incidentally, on what happened between 1857 and 1867. Then, as now, the government of Madras or the government of Tamil Nadu, whatever you may call it, like the mills of God, they were grinding very slowly and grinding exceeding small. So between 1857 and 1867, for 10 whole years, there was a great debate about what needs to be done for the Madras Medical College. And practically every annual report of the Madras Medical College concludes with, we have expanded far beyond the space that is available. The library is filled with books. The students don't have a reading room in which they can spend their time between lectures, and we need the government to do something. So this keeps going on and on and on. Finally, in the mid 1860s, there is a very dynamic vice chancellor of the University of Madras, Sir Eyre Burton Powell, who was also the principal of the Madras Christian College. This is the man who lends his weight for the expansion of the Madras Medical College, and eventually, for 32,000 rupees, there is a sanction for the expansion of the building itself. And what you get at the end of that expansion is a larger operating theater, a lecture room, and all that. And even then, as you know, the government of Madras was run by very good Scots people. So the 32,000 rupees was whittled down to 17,000 rupees, the balance coming from some fund that had already been allocated, which hadn't been used. So there was no major expense for the government in spending and doing something about it. But for 32,000 rupees, they got something with which they were very happy. And then we find in 1887 that in 1883, a separate anatomy block was created with a theater and a dissecting room. And to this, an enlarged museum was added in 1887, 1888. Sen concludes by stating that separate buildings for biology and hygiene were added, but he does not mention as to when those buildings were added and what happened to them. So this is one account, which is in 1904, which says that by 1883 and 1887, probably the anatomy block was completed. Then in 2004, we have the next major documentation, which is by the architect Kalpana and Frank Schiffer. It's a book called Madras, the Architectural Heritage. And there they very clearly, they state that the anatomy block was completed in 1897. Now, I'm unable to reconcile the two. I'm not able to reconcile why Sen, who must have been much closer to the actual happenings, wrote 1887. These people are writing 1897, unless there was a typographical error in what Kalpana and Frank Schiffer wrote about 1897. Now, they not only write 1897, they add yet another element of mystery to it. They say that the first floor of the building is supported on tall iron columns, all of which bear the estampage of 1907. And they say this was probably the date on which the building was completed. So we have a wide swing of dates between 1887 and 1907 for the construction of the anatomy block. But what is very interesting is that architecturally, and this is my own contribution, I find that the building is closer to 1897 than it is to 1887. See, 1887, we still had Robert Fellows Chisholm in Madras as the consulting architect to the government. And, there were buildings like the Victoria Public Hall that were being constructed just opposite at the same time. And in terms of architectural features, the MMC building does not have much similarity with what Chisholm was doing. But 10 years later, when Moor Market was being constructed next to Victoria Public Hall, which is just around 1897, 1898 and ending in 1901, we find that there is a lot of similarity in the skyline between the anatomy block and the old Moor Market, especially the little crenellations at the top, the domes at the four corners, the little domes, the very, very tiny domes. So these are all more design elements than structural features, and they are almost identical to the skyline of the Moor Market. My guess is probably there was a consulting architect at this time in the government by name of R.E. Ellis, not R.S. Ellis, but R.E. Ellis. And he still has a bust for himself in the government museum, in the gardens of the government museum. He was the man who designed the Madras Moor Market, and it is very likely that because he was the superintending engineer of the government of Madras at that time, he was consulted in the construction of the anatomy block of the Madras Medical College. The first reference to the fact that it was being spoken of as the Red Fort is sometime in the 1940s. Prior to that, I don't see the name Red Fort coming along anywhere. And probably it was then that somebody, out of a great sense of affection, decided to name it as the Red Fort, which is the name by which all of you seem to be very familiar with the building. But the core element, which has continued unbroken till 2016, appears to be the museum, because it appears to have started even in 1836, when there was no Red Fort, when the college was operating out of just the Surgeon General's quarters in the General Hospital. Even then, there is mention of the museum and of specimens being kept over there, and continuous mention of specimens being added to the museum as time goes along. The I mentioned to you the Surgeon General's quarters, which were the lecture rooms initially. In the expansion of 1867, where I said there's a lot of government documentation, it is very interesting to see how much of importance has been given to natural light and ventilation by the architects of that period. Something that is completely forgotten in today's world, particularly when we are now trying to see how we can prevent a 27-storied building being constructed just opposite the Madras Medical College, facing the central station, completely steel, glass, and concrete and air conditioning. And it is going to block the sea breeze, it's going to block the view of all the heritage buildings, everything is going to go. But the government is unshakable in its resolve of putting up what it refers to as a multimodal transport hub. Why that needs 27 floors is beyond me. But the interesting thing is that in 1867, when the architect at that time wants to expand the hospital, his plans are to create a uniform frontage which is facing the sea. And they then find out that the only aspect that is blocking sea breeze from coming in is the old Surgeon General's headquarters. And the government then appoints a delegation to come and visit the hospital. And that includes everybody, right from the chief consulting architect downwards to the principal of the medical college, who's a Dr. Smith at that time. And they come during the day, then they go back, they then consult the government astronomer, who's a man named Pogson, as to where the sea breeze comes from. Then they all identify that it is that building which is blocking the sea breeze, and it is demolished just to make way for sea breeze to enter the Madras Medical College, so that the students and the teachers can continue with their activity without any problems of ventilation. So much of thought seems to have gone into the construction of the building facing the sea. Of course, today, lots of other things have happened. The Muthuswamy overbridge has come, which is blocking the view of the building. And then finally, in 2016, as you all know, the building is emptied of all its contents, or it is declared that it will become a museum. But nothing much has happened thereafter by way of converting it into a museum. It seems to be just there. The easiest way to weaken a heritage building, in my view, is to empty it of all its contents so that it is devoid of all basic maintenance. The moment you stop doing that, heritage buildings begin to, it almost appears as though they suddenly grow old. Leaves begin collecting in drainage chutes, windows begin falling off, water begins to percolate into the building. All these things happen. And that is probably what is happening there as well. The next thing, in order to do away with a heritage building, is to announce that a museum will be put up over there. In my view, hardly 1% of the total tourist population goes to even the government museum. And can you imagine a medical college museum trying to attract visitors outside of the medical fraternity? It's not going to happen at all. The best way to allow that building to survive would have been for the medical college to continue using it, repurposing it in some fashion and putting it to good use functionally, because that is what it was meant for. It was not meant to be converted into a museum. It was meant to be used by students. It was meant to have footfalls all the time. In fact, in 2004, when Kalpana writes her book, she says that the building is in an excellent state of preservation because it is continuously in use. Those are the exact lines that the late Kalpana, she is no longer with us, but she's used those lines. And today, when you see that the building is not put to use, the exact opposite of that is going to happen. So this is what I wanted to say. And I thank Dr. Badrinath for having invited me to speak today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sriram, for that wonderful view of what the Red Fort stands for and how it came about. We are still trying to create a museum there. I don't know how we are going to succeed. All the graduates of Madras Medical College would like a museum there, but I don't know in what form this is going to happen. But we are trying to work at it. But you, as a historian, could tell us a bit more about how it can be done and what we should do or consider to make it a survivable museum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our second speaker today is Zarin Mistry. Zarin is Professor Cooper's daughter. She will provide valuable family history and personal recollections. Born in Chennai and raised in Raipuram, she has fond memories of her father and will shed light on his life beyond academia. Zarin is well known in Chennai for her contribution to the Parsi community. She has written several articles about the history of Parsis in Chennai. I would like to call Zarin to tell us a bit more about Professor Cooper and your family. Thank you.
Thank you, Badri. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. K. Badrinath and the directors of Madras Red Fort Doctors Foundation for organizing this program. And thank you everyone who is attending this. I have very little information about Daddy's youth, but all I know is that he spent his youth in Lahore. And over there, he had three other siblings, two sisters and one brother. Unfortunately, in 1934, his mom passed away when his youngest sister was only 3 months old. So then there was a real dilemma in the family because his father was not able to manage. He was working in the Singer Sewing Company in Aden. So they didn't know what to do. So he had an uncle staying in Royapuram who was a civil engineer. He was the director of factories. And he and his wife they were very kindly able to take over the upbringing of dad and his three siblings. I think they came here in 1934. And that was the time when my dad's uncle was living. I think many of you would know in Royapuram, there's the MV Diabetic Foundation. There was an old building over there, and my dad's uncle was staying, uncle and aunt staying there, and they did lead a fairly comfortable life. Now that building is no longer over there. So I don't know much more about how he joined. He was in Madras Christian College. And then I think I remember he and his friends saying, oh, come on, there's a lecturer's opening in the college. Let's take it. So I think that is how it started. Now, if you ask me what my memory of my father was, I have a few words: loving, dependable, stoic, encouraging, and uncomplaining. You know, mom and dad had no ancestral property or wealth. So we had very little, but even with what little we had, I didn't feel the lack of anything. I always felt I was living very comfortably. And one thing about dad, he had so many interests. You know, of course, his main thing was mechanical. He would love to take apart something and bring it back together. I used to remember him working on a transistor radio. He built a little radio for himself. He once took on a vegetable gardening. He did some sculpting at home. He sculpted a bust. He took great interest in anthropology. And there's just so many of these things. One memory of mine is whenever he used to go to the garage where his car was, he would be lying under and trying to tinker and doing something under with the chassis. And that was where you would always find him. And he had an old, very old cupboard with all sorts of tools. And he felt that he needed to do things on his own and not just rush to the garage. So that's one of the memories. So, you know, uh, as far as the music part of it goes, I know that he was a very good singer, and I know that many of you doctors must remember him playing the violin at various uh, occasions in the Madras Medical College. He learned Hindustani music, he learned how to play the harmonium, and he actually, his favorite singers were Tansen, the court of Akbar, whose songs Saigal sang. So his main people to go to were Saigal and Tansen. And there is a very famous song that Saigal sang, which is called Diya Jalao. And that was Daddy's sort of forte. Finally, when he would be, end of our get-togethers, he would sing that as a final song. And that's something that I remember. Now, Dad also took a very active role in community matters. He was the secretary of the Anjuman, that is our Parsi Anjuman, for many years, over 20 years, and he loved organizing get-togethers. In those days, we used to have these overnighters. We used to go to Vedantangal, Satanur Dam, Pundi, and Pondicherry. And at that time, there were no catering services, so you basically had to take all the raw material yourself. So our car was stuffed with potatoes, onions, eggs, and various oils and various other stuff, much to the dismay of my mom. And then we would go over there, and there were these old dark bungalows. There were no holiday resorts at that time. There were dark bungalows. So we used to stay in the dark bungalow, and I remember Daddy stirring a big pot of tea or making a big platter of eggs. And so that is the sort of thing that we did. And I remember that those were the simple pleasures we had at that time. And another thing that he liked very much was telling stories. He loved to get, that's one thing my children will vouch for. He would sit them on his lap, and then he would, have weave these wonderful stories. And one thing that I really benefited from, he had a wonderful collection of classics illustrated. I don't know how many of you people will remember, but about 50 or 70 years back, all the classics came out in comic form. And that was how I was introduced to, I think he had over 100 of those books. And if I had been wise enough at that time and not disposed of them summarily, today they would have been a collector's item. So that is how I was introduced. And in our functions, all the children would gather around him, and uncle, and he would, I think what I feel, he was very much more comfortable with talking to children than to talking with the other adults in the functions. So I think basically those are my memories. But one thing I'll tell you, he was modest to the core. I don't remember him ever coming back home and saying, oh, today my students applauded me for having given such a wonderful lecture, or that, nothing, absolutely nothing. In fact, my mother, myself, and our family owe it to doctors who, after Daddy passed away, they came and told us, we knew he was popular, we knew he was good, but how good? We really didn't know, because he wouldn't come and share. And that is what I feel. I wish he had not been so reticent, because then he would have told us something more about his youth. He would have told us something more about how he sort of were attracted to medicine as a career. And but so many blanks. And of course, I blame myself also for not asking him, because a man of few words in the house. He was very cheerful, very optimistic, but he didn't share much. So I think before the meeting started, one doctor said, we don't know whether we knew him as a person. That's true. It was difficult to know him as a person, and I wish he had been more open about it. Anyway, I do feel that Dad should have spent more time. Maybe, what all he knew he could have published, He could have written leaflets or books, I don't know what, but there must have been some constraints or there must have been some other reasons why he didn't. Anyway, it is great to be a part of this meeting. And my husband Kavas, my children Kurush and Tushna, we thank Dr. Badrinath and all the other organizing committee and all the people who are part of this video Zoom call. Thank you so much. And I did receive a beautiful arrangement of flowers, which is behind me. And I'm told that was for Dad. So I hope, Dad, you're looking down and participating in all this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zarin. I think you were going to share some pictures. I've got those pictures.
Yeah.
Shall I show them?
Yeah, please.
Okay. You can tell us a little bit if you want to comment on the pictures.
Yeah, if you could go to the next picture. This is Mom and Dad when they got married. This was a marriage photo, and you can see how young they look. Mom is dressed in a traditional Parsi sari with an embroidered border, and you can see the different type of sleeve. Mom came from a small village, a small town in Gujarat called Navsari. And even though they're a small town, they always used to copy the latest fashions of the French designer wear in their blouses. So basically, that's it. And theirs was a traditional arranged marriage. And Dad just went over to Calcutta, met the family, and then they decided to get married. And then Mom came down here. That was in 1950. Next, please. So that's my mom, me in the center, and that's Dad at the side, and sitting down, my son Purush and my daughter Tushna. Next slide. There's another photograph of Mom, my son, my dad, and my daughter Tushna. This is a snap of Dad. Next to him is his youngest sister, Thriti, who is still alive. She's 90 years old. And next to them is, of course, Mum. And this is his brother, Noshir, who has already passed away some years back. And of course, standing down there was my son, Purush. And oh yeah, you see, Dad and Mom played a great role in bringing up my son, because at that time I was working. So he and Mom brought him up literally. And so he was quite a favorite. So this is a nice picture of Dad and my son, who's now 45.
Thank
And
you.
if I may say just one more thing, Badri.
Yeah.
We're talking about the car coming in. He had an ambassador, and
Yeah.
it was MSV 8000. So my dad was not at all superstitious. So he went to the whatever registration office, and that guy wanted to know, what numerical number do you want? So he said, oh, which is the number that nobody wants? So he said, this is 8000 is there. Ade number kudupa. And he was very happy with that car for many years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zarin. Lovely to hear the stories about your family and Professor Cooper. Thank you.